Hi, welcome back to Bexhill West. I'm James. Thank you for joining me. Now today's video is going to be something a little bit different, and it's going to be a review or a test of this product, which is a model railway controller. Now my video I made recently around my wiring for Bexhill West prompted lots of comments and lots of thought sort of within myself around what control I was going to use. Now I've made no secret of the fact I'm not really that interested in running trains. I don't really have time for it. So I sort of thought I'd put that decision of control and whatever off until a later date, and I'd do the wiring and hope for the best. But that video and the comments and feedback I had from it suggested that probably I ought to invest in a controller. Now I've only got two P4 gauge engines, and both of these are DC controlled, but what I really want for Bexhill West I think is DCC. Now these could be converted, but for the time being ideally what I need is a DC controller and a DCC controller, and I'm sort of a bit unsure as to which to go for, when really I need both. And then I happened upon this thing which apparently does both. It's a dual mode system that will run DC and DCC, so hopefully I'll be able to use it on the bench to test engines like these, as well as eventually running DCC as well. So let's have a look inside the box, see what we get, and we'll see if it's any good. Now I'll say right from the start, this isn't a sponsored video. I've paid for this. This is bought out of my own money, so I'm going to test it. If it's no good I'll send it back, but if it is good it could be just what I'm after, in that it'll let me run both sort of configurations of engines. So let's have a look at it. So upon opening the box we are presented with the manual. In fact we've got two manuals. I'll have to find out why there's two manuals, and I'll get back to you in just a minute. So we've got the command station, that's the sort of, I don't know, the brains of the outfit perhaps. And we've got the hand controller itself. Now first thoughts are this feels quite lightweight, but it's quite nice. So we'll have a look at those in just a minute, and let's see what else we got. So there's the transformer, the mains lead, and that I'm guessing is the wire that connects the handset with the command station. So I've had a quick read of the instructions, and it appears the power supply plugs into the side there, and this cable to the throttle plugs in there. I mean, there's only one way any of this stuff could go together anyway, so it's not really rocket science. So we plug that together and let's see what we got. So the main power supply is just here. We press power and it comes on, and the DC LED is illuminated. There's a separate power button on the hand control, so we can press that one and it comes on and shows that we've got DCC on here, DC on here as well. Now one minor criticism is that there's a sort of a bleed on the light from the DC LED across to the DCC. In fact these three LEDs around that one all sort of partially illuminated, but anyway it is what it is. And then presumably, there we go, that's obviously going to control the speed of the train. So in DC mode that goes all the way up to 100, I'm guessing 100%. So we can wind that down. Now it does say in the instructions that because of sort of friction and what have you, when running in DC mode you wouldn't expect to see much happening, perhaps till it gets to sort of 20 or 30 on the dial. So we'll test that in a minute and see whether that really is the case. So we could run a DC locomotive with that just as it is, or we could press this button here, the mode switch, and now the colour's changed to blue and we're in DCC mode. Now the number displayed up here is a locomotive address, and we can rotate the knob and we could choose any address that we want for whatever engine we want to run. I must stop saying engine, it's a locomotive obviously, but I like to call them engines. Anyway, so we can, I'll check the specifications in a minute, but that seems to accommodate quite a healthy number of locomotives. Number 3 being a sort of a default setting. So if we wanted to operate locomotive number 3, we would press enter, and then at this point that's our throttle control. Now it goes up to 28 steps, so you've got sort of 28 degrees of finesse. Or if you press the button once, it now runs up to 126 steps. So I guess in that mode it's very, very precise control. Or we can come back. No, it's still in 126 steps, so let's press the button again. There we go, we're back into 28 step mode. So that's the basic setup, and then of course we can operate the functions and whatever that go with DCC. Now I don't have a DCC enabled P4 gauge locomotive, but I do have 00 gauge. So one of the benefits of my not having laid the track at Bexhill West yet is that I'll be able to set up a piece of 00 gauge track, and we'll test this out with a DC and a DCC locomotive, and we'll see whether this thing is any good. And as we get into it, I'd like to run the little P4 engines as well, and we'll see how well these run. Now this one I know needs a service and it's got very dirty wheels, so I don't expect this to run well at all, but this one seems to be quite a sweet little thing, so I think on DC that should be quite a nice test for this piece of equipment. Anyway, I'll get it set up and we'll see how we get on. So then, for the purposes of these tests, I've set up 2 pieces of rail. We've got 00 gauge and P4, and these are 2 new pieces of track, so there shouldn't be any problems with dirt on the rails or anything like that interfering the performance of the locomotive. So that should be a fairly good test of this machine. So I'll get this set up on Bexhill West and we can run a few engines. Now one of the comments that is always being asked of me is, when are we going to see some trains running? And it's not really my thing, but today there's going to be loads of trains running, so hopefully that will be enjoyable for some of you, and hopefully we'll put this thing through its paces and see if it's any good. So then, for our first test we tested a 00 gauge D-class locomotive. Now this is DCC fitted, as you can probably tell by the sound, and it's being driven by my daughter. Now she's never operated something like this before, so it seemed a good test of the equipment. Could she figure it out? Well, she certainly could. She figured it out very quickly, was able to operate all the sound functions and what have you. And this little clip gives you an idea of sort of how well it ran. Now I was really interested in the slow speed performance. We haven't got enough track set up here to sort of give it a good thrash. So we're just testing to see how controllable it was. And as a little test of that, I asked my daughter to back the train up and connect onto a carriage and see if she could do so without sort of shunting the thing down the track and having an accident. So that's what we're going to see here. Hopefully she's going to start slowly and back onto the carriage with no fuss. So I was really impressed with the slow speed performance of this locomotive with the DCC fitted. As far as I'm concerned, the DCC operation of this unit is really good. And here we go. Not bad. I think that was her second take, and she was still quite a novice with the controller at this point. So that test proved a success, and I have no doubt that the high-speed performance would be just as good. So next up is a C-class locomotive, and my daughter was challenged with the same task: try and control it as smoothly as possible, and let's see what the slow speed performance of it would be. Now I must add here that this locomotive hasn't been run in, so it's a bit of an unfair test. But one thing that struck us immediately was it was a lot noisier than the DCC controlled engine, and it was much harder to sort of drive it at slow speeds. However, she did a reasonable job, and we ran it backwards and forwards a few times as she got to grips with it. Now I've turned the sound off here because the sound from the motor it's really quite noisy and quite offensive. So I wasn't too impressed with that, and at this point I was thinking that this controller is not really much cop for controlling a DC locomotive. I was sort of thinking this would be a shortcoming of the device. Now it turns out that that's not the case, and we'll see that in a little while. I just think this engine is not performing as well as it possibly could have done. So here we go, here's the carriage test. Not too bad. If there was any passengers on there might be a little bit of wet plash though. So there we go, that was the test at DC. So to give you an idea of just how noisy this particular engine is, I'll run a little clip with some sound and you can see for yourself. Ready when you are. So then, disappointed with the performance of the C-Class, we've tested another engine on DC. Now this time it's a little Manning Mordal engine. You've seen this in a previous video, and it's running on P4 gauge track. So same scale as the other locomotives, just a different track gauge. And I'm not sure this video clip really does this justice with the camera tracking the engine, in that it's so smooth. This thing ran beautifully. In fact, of all the engines that my daughter tried out, I think this was probably one of her favourites. It was so controllable, from dead slow through to, you know, quite fast. Not as fast as the others, but for a little thing like this, it was really impressive. But the control of it was superb. You could stop it exactly where you wanted to, and you know, it was really good. This really lifted my spirits as to the quality or the performance of the controller. It's clearly capable of very, very fine control if you've got the right mechanism to control. And in this case, this particular locomotive, which has been built from a kit, not by me, I hasten to add, it runs beautifully, and really it speaks volumes of the skill of the person who put it together. It really does run nicely and is very controllable. Now, an interesting thing, the instructions for the controller state that when running on DC, you've got from sort of 0 to 100 power settings, and it said that on DC you won't get any performance, it just won't run until you get to about speed step 20, due to, I think, friction of a mechanism and what have you. Well, have a look at this clip. This is on speed step 1 of 100. As you can see, the engine's running really quite nicely. There's no sort of camera trickery involved here. This is exactly how it was. So again, I think on DC this controller to me seems excellent. Now of course it does rely upon the quality of the mechanism. I guess that's the same for all controllers. But if we have a look at the engine in closer detail, you can see it's fully sprung. It has what I believe is a high level gearbox. The motor's tucked inside the boiler. It's split frame pickups, so it's, you know, it's really nicely engineered. Wonderful little thing, really. And there you go, let's set it off again. So in my opinion, that's a very, very successful DC test. Certainly this piece of equipment seems to do exactly what it says on the box. And And so what of the little P-class locomotive that I showed earlier on in the video? Well, again, this is a kit-built locomotive, and to be honest with you, it's a bit grubby. The wheels need cleaning, and I've sort of run out of time, so we had a few false starts with it, but after a while, just a quick clean, we had that running fairly reliably and nicely too. Currently it's just in black primer, so I'm looking forward to painting that. Haven't decided what livery it will get yet, but looking forward to finishing it off. Now you'll see that we did have a few false starts, and occasionally the hand of God had to intervene and get it going again, but other than that, it's a nicely made little thing, and I'm sure with a little bit of TLC it will work quite nicely. So then, what is my honest appraisal of this little device? Well, it does exactly what I'd expected it to. It does exactly what it says it will do. It actually performs, I think, better than the manufacturers say. And you've seen how with a good quality mechanism, this thing in DC is really controllable. DCC was simple. It's maybe a little bit of a faff to operate the functions, because you have to sort of choose your locomotive, get that going, and then find the function. I'm sure there are more sophisticated devices that would have a separate button for every function. So in that sense, it's a little bit awkward, but it's not bad. And if an 11-year-old can, find her way around it really simply, then I'm sure everyone else can. It's good. I'm pleased with it. If I had a minor gripe, I'd say it does feel quite lightweight. I have in mind that a sort of a rubbery jacket around it, a bit like a mobile phone sleeve, would sort of make it feel slightly nicer in the hand. And I've actually drawn something up on the computer, and I thought I might have a go at sort of casting one in a elastomer or something to go over here, so I might do that if I get round to it at some point. Now, when I first took this out of the box, I thought this control wheel felt a bit lightweight, and I wasn't that impressed, and I immediately thought that needs to be knurled and have a sort of a better grippy action. But in fact I was wrong. It works really smoothly. I'm very impressed with it, so that's been good. So all in all, if you're in the market for something that will do DC and DCC, I'd recommend it. It's quite good. Now, because I've now got that facility to actually run stuff on the line, I can now get on with my track laying properly. Now with P4 gauge track, it's all hand built, and having spent hours and hours and hours making all the stuff, I'm reluctant to just throw it down without testing it properly, so this is going to be really useful. But I'm not going to lay the track just yet, because although I can now run locomotives backwards and forwards, I would like a bit of variety of rolling stock so that everything can be tested properly. So over the coming weeks on the channel, we'll see some sort of bits of rolling stock getting constructed, and we'll have a look at some of those processes. Now finally, just before I go, I will mention the ballast vacuum system. That's doing really well, and I'm really pleased that that's now going to be available in Australia and in the USA and also in Europe. So those people who've been after the device and not been able to get hold of it, that's coming your way very soon. So hopefully probably next week there will be a video out, and I'll give all the details explaining what's going on with that. So until then, thank you very much for watching. It's nice to be back. It won't be long, or won't be as long, until my next video. I look forward to seeing you then. Cheerio.